Hello and welcome to this presentation by the UK Data Service about the data that we hold on work, employment and earnings. My name is Pierre Walthéry. I am a researcher with the UKDS and I'm really happy to take you to this short journey on employment and the labor market. So to start with, I will just say a few words about this presentation, which is going to be mostly about really bread and butter essential data that is very commonly used by researchers in academia and elsewhere. The plan that I will be following is basically, I will say a few words about who we are and what we do as UK Data Service. I will spend a little bit of time talking about definitions of work and employment, and then focus the core of what I'm going to say on the labor force survey. And I will finish by providing a few tips about how to find data on our website. Okay, so who are we? What do we do? So the UK Data Service, in very briefly, is the main repository of UK secondary social science data. So it is a provider of support, training, and individual guidance to users. All of this is freely accessible and funded by the Economic and Social Research Council. In terms of the data creation side of what we do, we hold and we provide access to major UK surveys, so which is large-scale cross-sectional government survey series, the labor force survey being a case in point, but also major longitudinal studies, typically things such as understanding society or one-off academic studies. We also provide access to all other data, multinational data, census, business and administrative macro data, as well as qualitative and multimedia data. We provide, and that's the other side of our business, training and user support via a help desk, which any of you are most welcome to use, via webinar, drop-ins, workshops, and also online learning material that is available at any time for users. We also we do not only work with or provide training with survey data, but also with new forms of data, computational social science. Okay, now to focus on a few definitions that are probably good to know when thinking about labor market data or employment and work. It's precisely about clarifying a little bit what we mean by work and employment, and maybe labor, which are the three words that the English language hold for basically what we do in relation to work. So, and sometimes these are used interchangeably. Okay, so employment is at its core a form of economic activity and a legal relationship, legal contractual relationship between two or more parties. So it has a formal definition, and as a result of this formal definition, there is a wide availability or wide supply of standardized statistics across the industrial world. So it's something that's relatively straightforward to find data about. On the other hand, work, and even if it's sometimes used as a synonym of employment, work is either or has to be either understood as a specific form of employment, that is a job, or, and that's maybe the more scientifically adequate understanding of the word, as the activities and the circumstance that take place as part of the employment relationship. Basically, the characteristics, the finer characteristics of what happens in this contractual employment arrangement. And of course, it follows from this that all work is not employment. All work does not necessarily take place within an employment relationship. And finally, beyond this dichotomic distinction between work and employment, there's also broader aspects that are usually also examined when looking at work. So I'm thinking about the really finer nitty-gritty examination or analysis of what happens every day, every hour in people's activities when they are at work. So it's the field of ergonomics, and there is data about that. I'm thinking also about broader views about people's thoughts and representations about their job or aspects of their job. So either, therefore, about their employment or their work. And then other research on aspects of work and employment, such as, for example, research on and data, therefore, on job quality. Okay, so now looking and focusing on the first part of, or the first concept, that is employment, we can say a few things. So employment as an economic activity is part or is the object of an internationally agreed definition that is, or the keeper of it, so to speak, is the International Labour Office, which is a branch of the United Nations. And there are different variations of this, but the bottom line, or the bottom of this distinction, is a distinction between paid work, unemployment, and economic inactivity. A part of it maybe is also, or brings about the distinction between employment as self-employed or employment as an employee. So in some data, this is part of the same variable. In this, as I've just mentioned, or employment status being a distinction between self-employed and employees. Okay, so, and then beyond this really basic sets of characteristics, there are a number of contractual aspects or contractual aspects that have to do with work that can also be, or that are also very commonly recorded in survey. I'm having in mind things such as whether the employment contract is full-time or part-time. So these are really, really common variables that you can find, of course, in the labor force survey, but also in most social surveys. These are part of the socio-economic control variables that people use in their analysis. For those of you more interested in further exploring the distinction between work, employment, and different aspects of work, I have added this picture here, or this plot, coming from the International Labour Office. So if you're interested in exploring more, have a look at this and follow the link to the ILO. Okay, now I'm going to focus on what is the main interest of this presentation, which is the labor force survey. The labor force survey really is the workforce of labor market analysis in the UK. So it was first collected in 1973 and then maybe in 1975 as well, as a series of one-off. And then it began to be a regular survey from 1981, a yearly survey, and since 1991 began as what is called a continuous survey. It began as a requirement of the UK becoming a member of the EU. It is required indeed from members of the EU to collect data on the labour market for Eurostat. The data collection was carried out and still is by the Office for National Statistics. And as I said, really, the LFS is the mainstay of most labour market statistics in the UK. So when you hear about the labour market, employment, etc., numbers, it's most likely coming from the LFS. So there are about 30,000, sorry for the typo here, 30,000 respondents interviewed at each quarter, because indeed now the LFS is a quarterly survey. So these 30,000 respondents, or some of these respondents, are reinterrogated at 4 subsequent quarters, which provides short-term longitudinal data. So from this survey machine or this survey organization follows or derives 4 kinds of products. The first one is, and the most commonly used, is the quarterly labor force surveys. Cross-sectional data, large sample, 30,000, and the broader supply or the larger supply of variables about the labor market. In addition to that, there's also the longitudinal data set. So either 2 or 5 quarters longitudinal data, which by definition is a smaller sample and provide fewer variables than the quarterly LFS data set. At the other end, we also have the annual population survey, which is a collation of several quarterly data sets, has a very large sample, so allows researchers to create very accurate estimates, but on the other hand, has fewer variables. And then there's a household level series of data sets. Okay, so now I'm going to focus in the next slides on really key LFS variables that most researchers of the labor market use very frequently. So the first one is working time. So when we talk about working time in the context of mainstream labor market analysis, it mostly is weekly working time. And actually, this refers to 2 slightly distinct definition or variables. So one is about the working time during a period of reference, usually last week, or the week before which people are interviewed, or the usual working time during stylized, typical week people are asked about. So these are the 2 very common. And of course, we use usual working time when actual working time is not available. For example, when in the case of people who are temporarily sick or on leave. And then in addition to this core measure of weekly working time, additional variables or additional questions are asked about whether people are on flexible or atypical work patterns, such as flexi-time, on-call work, or others. Or another aspect of it is also whether people work unsocial hours, which is work at the weekend or in the evenings. The downside of such variables is that they provide little information about daily or monthly working time, and also we don't know much about the daily or weekly rhythms and cycles for people who do not work the same amount of hours every day. Another key variable for the study of labor market is occupation. So occupation in a nutshell is the formalization of the notion of job. So we could say it's the task or duties that one carries out as part of the employment relationship. And these are usually defined formally around, on the one hand, the levels of skills required to carry out these duties and the degree of specialization that is also required. All of that is summarized or recorded in a nomenclature that's called the Standard Occupational Classification, or SOC, that was latest revised in 2020. So SOC is basically a list of occupation, and that comes in 4 different flavors. A really summarized one, which only includes 9 occupation or 9 major groups, which 1-digit occupation, and more detailed ones up to the unit level, unit group, which are 4-digit list of occupation, and of which there are a few hundred. So to give you a small idea of what it looks like, on the left-hand side, we have the least detailed occupation. So the 7 here is an example, or 6, even if it's not visible. And then we have 2-digit, 3-digit, up to the 4-digit detailed definition of occupation. Another key LFS variable or labor market variable is industry sector. So this is not anymore individual level variable, but it's about the economic activity of the business or organization where people or the respondent are employed. So there's also a nomenclature internationally agreed, which is the Standard Industrial Classification, and the latest revision of this dates from 2007. And similarly to SOC, we have 4 levels of detail, ranging from sections, which are I think 13, up to, which is the 1-digit list, and up to class, which are the most detailed version. So to give an overview here as well, so we have the letter that describes the 1-digit, agriculture, forestry, and fishing, up to the 4-digit here. We can see growing of grapes, growing of tropical and subtropical fruit, as an example. Okay, and now maybe another kind of commonly looked at variable in the LFS, we have earnings. So earnings can be recorded as hourly or monthly, or in less often yearly or weekly. So in the specific case of the LFS, people are asked to provide an amount of money they make, and then the period of time that this money is earned for. Usually it's hourly and monthly, but sometimes it's not, and actual hourly and monthly amounts are derived by the Office for National Statistics. These questions are asked separately for gross and net earnings, as well as for main and second job. I asked about variable pay, whether it's variable over time, and for those who are interested in categorical versions, so pay bands are available, which is also a way of asking people who are reluctant to, or reckoning people's earnings who are reluctant to provide a precise amount of money they make. In most of the survey, the information that's recorded about earnings is much simpler and usually focuses on net monthly pay or a single figure. And of course, it's important to keep in mind that earnings are distinct from income, and income also include benefits and incomes from capital, for example, rent and investment. So broadly speaking, what kind of other survey data is available on employment and work. So if looking at job satisfaction, there's the European Working Conditions Survey, which was collected in the last time with UK data in 2015, unfortunately not anymore because of Brexit. There's the Time Use Survey that allows for really precise and detailed available of daily or weekly work rhythms, so literally every 10 minutes. Then if you're interested in the broader pictures of people's incomes, then the Family Resource Survey as well as the annual survey of hours and earning provide more detailed information on the one hand about other sources of income, on the other about again work-related earnings. For people interested in longer term than 5-quarter employment trajectories, Understanding Society is the place to go. You can not only follow people's labor market trajectories for several years, but also the associated or look at associations with a wide range of other variables. And finally, if you're interested in attitudinal data, then the British Social Attitude Survey is the place to go. Something to always be careful about when working with survey data. Oops, sorry, I'm getting wrong with the slide here. Something that another type of data basically that's available is qualitative and deposited survey research data. So these are research data deposited by people whose project was funded by the ASHE-HMRC, and is increasingly a treasure trove of lesser known and lesser accessible kind of data, all of which are accessible via reshare on the UKDS website. So just to show the research, the outcome of a research I did on the website using reshare and work as keywords. And you can see there are all sorts of interesting studies or data that you can use for your project. And that's the slide I wanted to talk about before. Something really essential to consider when looking at survey data is to make sure that you understand what the phrasing of a question behind a variable was. So always look at the actual question in the documentation. Then consider the sample size of the data you work with. Is it large enough? And also, what was the population of reference? The date of at which, or the time in which the data was collected may be important for your research question. So does it make sense for you to work with data that was collected a long time ago? Survey design and weights and how they need to be used also is something that needs to be looked at, as well as the application process required to access the data. Which leads me to the next and final topic, how to find and access data from the UK Data Service. I will really go quickly here. So there are basically three main entry to our data. So either via the data catalog, which is among other search tool or browse the data pages, variable and question bank, and QualiBank for qualitative data. There's also asset thesaurus, which is about looking for keywords. So searching the catalog, very straightforward with the larger search box on the main page of our website. That gives you for example, on climate change, a list of all that deals with it. In terms of data access policy, and that's important because not all data is freely or easily accessible. We have 4 levels of access, ranging from open data, which can be freely downloaded, to controlled data, which is which requires a lengthier process of application, and also can only be used in a secure lab or a SafePod network. If you want to register to access data and you are affiliated with public sector or academic organization in the UK, you can log in via Open Athens or Shibboleth. If you're not, you can simply create your own UK Data Archive account and apply for access to the data from there. You will find here on the slides a series of references to the resources I've mentioned. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope this will help your research, and I am looking forward to your questions and comments.
Hello everyone, my name is Phan. I'm from the Wage Employment Dynamic project, and we are excited to present the insights from our work using the newly linked ASHE and HMRC dataset to better understand the dynamics of income and employment in the UK. Now let's dive in. Let's start with the ASHE data. ASHE data is the annual surveys of hours and earning. Is one of the UK's most important sources for official statistics on earnings and working hours. It plays an important role in monitoring policies such as the impact of the national living wage, the national minimum wage, and also in analysing pensions reform. So the ASHE data represent 1% sample of the employee job taken randomly from the PAYE register, and it is completed by their employer if they work in April each year. Completion of the surveys is mandatory. However, in the practice, not all employers respond to the surveys, or maybe they don't respond quickly enough by the time the ASHE surveys end. So therefore, the annual yield from the issued sample of ASHE is around 66%. And owners create cross-sectional weight to make it representative of the populations of the employee jobs. However, one of our methodology paper that consider about the employer non-random response in ASHE, so that we enhance the cross-sectional weight. And from that, we also estimate of the longitudinal weight as well, because originally ASHE is designed for cross-sectional study, not for the longitudinal study. And then therefore the attrition in ASHE tend to be higher compared to other surveys. We move to the HMRC data. So HMRC dataset provide another perspective covering a broader range of income throughout the PAYE data and the self-assessment data. So the data we have is for 1% of employee job in the UK who should be represented in the ASHE sample. So in the PAYE, we have for those who has employee jobs or occupational pensions, and we have a very detailed of their employment and their payment and payment submissions record weekly or monthly. And then the data is coverage from tax year 2015 to 2019. For the self-assessment data, it includes house employment and all the income. And that's for those who make the self-assessment returns form. And the data expands from the tax year 2011 to 2018. But it has some limitations. Just say they miss some key personal characteristics. We move on to discuss more detail about the data, the newly linked data, ASHE and HMRC data. So on the left-hand side, you see that's the PAYE data, and on the right-hand side, you can see the SA data, the self-assessment data, and they are able to link straight directly with each other by the HMRC ID. So take a step back and then we look at the PAYE data itself. So from all the source files provided by owners, so we turn it into the output files, including PAYE weekly clean, that's the payslip record for those who pay weekly only, and then the PAYE monthly clean, so that's the payslip record for those who pay monthly only. And then when we're gathering all the weekly and then the monthly pay together and then converted their pay into the monthly, we call that the PAYE monthly panel, and we combine them all to turn their payment into weekly pay, so we call that the weekly panel. Similarly, for the ASHE supplements, that's a PAYE ASHE supplement, that's the payslip data by the individuals and the year, and some across the all job, include information on the number of job, proportions of time in paid employment, labor market activity at the time of the ASHE survey. And it's also included data from the employment files and an end of years file, and of course some of which do not have any payslip associated with them. So now we're taking on this self-assessment data. So we got all different source files from the self-assessment data who making the self-assessment return. So it's including the main tax returns file and the short tax return schedule files, additional information schedule, self-employment, especially partnership schedule, and then self-employment including solo trader schedule, and employment schedule, tax calculation schedule, and summary files, and also some demographic information file at the end. And then we're gathering all of them all together and make it as the output files we call it as a master. And then from those we are collapsed by the individuals and by year to create the as a submaster. And in the PAYE data supplied to the web project, they don't have any information on the someone age or gender, but we can recover these from the ASHE data. So as long as the people appear in ASHE at least once in the period 1997-2022, so we try to recover the pedant age and gender into the HMRC data. So here is the number of individuals in the HMRC data sets that we have. So for the weekly pay, in the PAYE data, so around 100,000 people in each year from 2015-2019, and for the monthly pay is 3 times as the number as the weekly pay. And when we combine them all together, so we got around 350,000 people in each year. And then for self-assessment data, we got around 100,000 people in each year, 2011-2019. But we're curious about what the linkage rate between ASHE and the PAYE data. So here is the summary, and then here is the figure to show the match rate between the ASHE and the PAYE data. So overall, the match subsets include 725,000 observations, and the match rate is vary from 77% in 2014 to around 81% in 2018. And similarly for the self-assessment data, so we expect quite a low rate between ASHE and the self-assessment data, because ASHE is for the employee jobs and the self-assessment for those who make self-assessment returns. And then the match rate between the ASHE and self-assessment observations is include around 122,000 observations, and then the match rate varies from around 7.5% to around 9% across the year. So the question is how well the data is. So we just take one example. So we compare the weekly pay between ASHE and the PAYE data for people who have only one job at the point in time of the ASHE surveys. And why we choose that sample, because we don't have specific identifier or the address to merge job by job between ASHE and the PAYE data. So that's why we have to take the subset of the people who have one job at the point in time in ASHE, so that we make sure that that's the right subset between ASHE and the right subset of the PAYE data to compare their paid. And then you can see on the figures, the mean and the median weekly wage are almost identical across the whole wage distributions. The ASHE data appears to have a slightly more higher pay employee, but the differences are negligible. So we go further to invest the gender pay gap for those people who has one job at the point in time of the ASHE surveys. So we can see that the gender pay gap for ASHE seems slightly smaller as compared to the PAYE data, but at the lower pay distributions, the difference seems very, very small, but the difference seems getting wider at the top pay distributions. Another example that which we did with the HMRC PAYE data is try to look at the number of weeks and the number of jobs people held over the year for those who in the working age, means 16 to 64 for the whole period. So on the left hand side is the number of weeks people work in a year. And on average, you can see that in a given tax years over the period, tax 2015 to tax year 2019, roughly around 3/4 of them had at least one job paid in the pay employment for nearly the whole year. And however, only around 1 in 10 of them who were paid employments for less than 31 weeks in a year. And on the right hand side, you can see that the number of the employee jobs held by those people, on average, around 3/4 of employee has a single employer, and around 20% of women and 17% of men who have 2 employers over the course of a year. And the remainder of 8 to 7% had at least three or more different employers. As we all know that earning can be varied across the industry where people work for. So we try to plot the figures, the average nominal gross hourly wage in ASHE against the average annual gross nominal earnings in HMRC by industry in industry sector for those who in working age 16 to 64 in Great Britain. So and you can see that diagonal dashed lines show the implied gross nominal annual earning in the industry sector. What does that mean? So we mean that we take the average hourly wage for their gender and for their sector they're working on, and then accumulate it for the whole year. So for approximately around 1,950 hours, and that's the line will give us some indications of which industry sector tend to be associated with the persons who are going to earn relative more or less compared to the working hour, the actual working hour they earn in ASHE. And comparing the male and female plot, we can see many more of the industry level average of the nominal annual gross hourly earning for women lie well below the dotted line as compared to men. So the result shows the greater prevalences of the part-time work among the women. In another data insights published under the ADR UK, we try to use the enhanced ASHE data and the ASHE-HMRC data to analyze the gender pay gap in Great Britain. So the figure here shows three measurements of the gender pay gap. The dotted lines mean the unweighted gender pay gap. And then the dashed line is the gender pay gap using the ONS weight, and then the solid lines is the gender wage gap with the adjusted wet weight. So all three series shows the conversions in the gender pay gap over the 20 years period. But there is also a clear rank order in terms of the size of the gender pay gap when it's estimated from ASHE in different way. So the gap in the mean pays are higher than those who's in median pay. The unweighted gap are lower than those estimated with weight. But one noticed that the gender pay gaps is always larger with the wet adjusted way than when it is using the ONS ways, around by 1 percentage point throughout the series. Now we move on the ASHE PAYE data because it will provide a new perspective on the gender pay gap by estimating the gap in total earning across all the jobs that the employees undertake in the given period. So in this exercise, we take the tax year 2018-2019 as an example. So we can see the top graph is the gender pay gap in week 4 of the tax year 2015-2016, and then the bottom left show the gender pay gap in terms of the month pay for the first 3 months of the tax year 2018-2019, and the bottom right is graph show the gender pay gap in the first quarter of the tax year. So we can see that the estimations of the gender pay gap do not appear to be sensitive to the length of the periods used, whether it's weekly or monthly or quarterly. So the overall gender pay gap still stay at around 30-31%. And it is 3 times as large as the gap in the hourly pay derived from the ASHE for the same year, which is shown in the previous slide. So this suggests that the hours of work within the week rather than weeks of work and the multiple jobs holdings are the principal factor explaining the average earning gap. And then therefore, we need a further analysis and a deeper analysis looking beyond the average may reveal a different pattern for the gender wage gap. Above are all the illustrations that what we can do with the ASHE and HMRC data. And of course it's rare in some certain way because they've got a detailed employment, detailed pay, so we can analyze to study about the fertility in terms of earnings. But also the data itself have some problem as well. So for example, they lack of the personal characteristic. We don't have a lot of personal characteristic except to retrieve back from ASHE in terms of the gender, age. And we also lack of the matching across the data sets and lack of the business reference, so that which is allow us not able to link job by job between ASHE and PAYE data, but this issues is under review by ONS at the moment. So hopefully in the future we will have a better match rate between job to job rather than person to person at the moment. And here is some work using the ASHE and HMRC data. So the first one is the study of Brewer to measurement earning volatilities using the ASHE and the PAYE dataset, and the two data insights from the web projects as well using the ASHE and HMRC data to provide kind of the very first insight what we can do with the ASHE and HMRC data. So how the user will be supported using our data. So we got a wide range of documentations available for them. So the user guides, the metadata, some methodology paper as well, which I mentioned in previously, and some code repository to see what we've done with the data, how we are turned to admin the data to the kind of the research ready data for the wider researcher. And where you can find them, you can find them on the ONS websites or in the web team websites, that wagedynamic.com. And then we're also building the knowledge hub for the user for Q&A as well. So here's the link, and thank you for your listening.
Hi, my name is Jule Adriaans, and I'm a researcher at the Faculty of Sociology at Bielefeld University in Germany. And today I would like to showcase some of the research potential that the European Social Survey has to offer. Based on the ESS Round 9 data collection, I will focus on subjective evaluations of income, tackling the question how fair or unfair is the pay of workers in Europe. The motivation behind this is pretty straightforward. There are substantial inequalities in Europe, both within and between countries. And on the right-hand side, we can see some figures on income inequality in the UK. The bottom half of the population earn about 18% of all income, while the very top 1%, so a tiny fraction of the population, already earn about 12% of all income. In light of such numbers, government and supranational organizations such as the UN or EU have put the reduction of inequalities on their agendas. The need to reduce inequality is usually motivated by the implicit or explicit assumption that ultimately inequality harms societies. So why is it so hard to foster concrete political support for measures that reduce inequality? First, lay people are notoriously bad at judging the extent of inequality, including misjudging their own position in the distribution. And second, people seem to strive for justice rather than equality, that is, distributions that take individuals' needs and contributions into account rather than allocating everyone the same share. Based on these two observations, I argue that justice considerations offer an important angle on how people make sense of inequality and react to it. In other words, while observed differences in income, like we see them on the right-hand side, are crucial, subjective appraisals of income offer a compelling perspective on inequality as well. Accordingly, I'm going to try to answer the question, How unfair is Europe from the perspective of lay people, and how do people react to the unfairness they identify? I'm trying to answer these questions. We built on the two guiding principles of empirical justice research. First, justice lies in the eye of the beholder, meaning that justice perspectives are subjective. And second, justice is multidimensional, meaning that justice evaluations are formed about all kinds of things, distributions, procedures, and behavior, and from multiple perspectives, taking fairness for self and fairness for others into account. These principles were also important guideposts in developing a rotating question module that featured in Round 9 data collection of the European Social Survey, short ESS. 30 items on subjective justice evaluations were fielded, with fieldwork spanning from 2018 to 2019. The European Social Survey is a general population survey that offers high-quality country comparative data across a wide range of European countries and topics. In Round 9, 29 European countries participated, resulting in a large data set with more than 49,000 respondents, which included more than 26,000 respondents who reported working for pay. The special questionnaire model on justice and fairness in Europe covered a wide range of measures that referred to distributive justice, procedural justice, and the belief in a just world, and detailed documentation on all items and concepts is available on the ESS website. For today, we are focusing on the justice of outcomes, in particular, the fairness of evaluations of own income. So how is this measured? Respondents were asked, would you say that your gross pay is unfairly low, fair, or unfairly high? Keep in mind that the ESS Round 9 data collection took place as face-to-face study, so an interviewer would read the question to the respondent and provide them with the following 9-point response scale. The response scale captures three things. It distinguishes between fairness and unfairness. People who think their pay is fair would choose the scale midpoint, the 0. Secondly, the response scale distinguishes between unfair under-reward, getting less than deserved, indicated by the left-hand side of the scale, and the negative numbers, and unfair over-reward, that is getting more than deserved on the right-hand side. Finally, the scale allows to differentiate the intensity of injustice with higher absolute numbers, indicating a stronger sense of unfairness. Okay, so how do workers in Europe evaluate their own pay? Looking at the answer distribution, we can see that about 43% of all workers in Europe evaluate their pay as fair, displayed in purple. While this sounds like quite a few people are content with their pay, this also implies that the majority of workers in Europe thinks that they are unfairly paid, with 52% feeling unfairly underpaid and only 5% feeling unfairly overpaid. So far, we have pooled responses across all 29 countries. If we look at the answer distributions for each country separately, we can detect some pretty sizable country differences. While in Denmark, 68% of workers feel they are fairly paid, a large majority of 80% of all workers in Hungary feel that they are unfairly underpaid. In general, we can see a tendency that the share of unfairly paid workers is larger in low-income countries. Okay, we've already seen that the overall state of fairness seems to be rather grim with regard to workers' own pay. However, as we already discussed above, people do not only form fairness evaluations about themselves, but also about others. We take this into account by focusing not only on the fairness for self, but also the fairness of others. In particular, we add another perspective, and that is how fair is the pay within a person's occupation. We asked, in general, do you think the pay of people who work in the same occupation as you in Europe or in your country is unfairly low or unfairly high? Combining these two evaluations of own pay and of pay in the occupation captures unique constellations of justice and injustice that have been shown to have unique consequences. To reduce complexity, we only distinguish between fairness and unfairness, yielding a 2x2 typology. If we fill in the 2x2 table, we can distinguish 4 different kinds of justice constellations. If both own pay and pay within the occupation are fair, there is no deprivation. All is good. If, however, one's own payer is evaluated as unfair, but pay and the occupation is deemed fair, we may call this constellation egoistic deprivation. On the contrary, if only the occupational pay is unfair, we may refer to this as fraternal deprivation. Building on previous research, we assume that constellations where self is deprived, the corresponding justice consequences would also relate to self. Here, we would expect a reduced well-being response. At the same time, if one's group is unfairly paid, we would assume justice responses that are more directed at systematic change, that is, a political reaction. Finally, in constellations where both self and group are unfairly paid, people face double deprivation, which, given the multiple sources of unfairness, are assumed to show a particularly intense justice response. Now let's see how prevalent these justice constellations are. About half of all workers in Europe face double deprivation. That is, both themselves and the occupational group is paid unfairly. At the same time, only a relatively small fraction thinks it's only them who are being paid unfairly, 6% overall. And some more people think it's only their occupation, but not themselves, who faces unfair pay. That's 13% overall. The remaining 30% face no deprivation at all. If we again take a country comparative perspective, we see that egoistic deprivation is most prevalent in high-income countries, with the largest share of about 11% in Norway, while double deprivation with multiple sources of unfairness is most prevalent in Eastern Europe. Above, I argued that justice consequences map onto the object of evaluation, and double deprivation will show the strongest justice response. If we put this to the test by using a categorical variable that covers the 4 possible fairness constellations as an explanatory variable for well-being and political reactions, we can see that, in fact, double deprivation shows the strongest associations with justice outcomes: life satisfaction, subjective health, satisfaction with democracy, and preference for redistribution. Moreover, egoistic deprivation focusing on unfair pay for self is more relevant for well-being than fraternal deprivation, and at the same time, fraternal deprivation focusing on unfair pay for the occupational group shows a stronger association with preference for redistribution than egoistic deprivation, suggesting that indeed group-level injustice relates to system-level call for change. So what have we learned? Based on ESS Round 9 data, there is a strong sense of unfair pay among workers in Europe, with the majority of workers evaluating their own pay as unfair. However, the experience of unfairness is not limited to self, but extends to the occupational group as well, with about half of all workers in Europe facing double deprivation, with the highest prevalence in Eastern Europe. This is highly relevant because the experience of unfairness has consequences. While unfairness of own pay is associated with lower well-being, fraternal deprivation is linked to a stronger preference for redistribution. While this was only a very first glimpse into the larger question of how workers in Europe evaluate their pay, I hope this showcase was able to emphasize the immense potential that the European Social Survey offers in studying subjective attitudes towards income and employment based on freely available, high-quality data that, beyond this small exercise, allows to link justice considerations to inequality structures, country-level contexts, and a range of justice consequences spanning personal and political responses. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you consider using the European Social Survey with its wide range of topics and countries covered as part of your research.